On this episode of the Photography News podcast, Kingsley shoots desolate landscapes, Will shoots green-eyed monsters, and Roger shoots drooling dogs. Hello and welcome to the Photography News podcast. My name is Roger Payne, and before I introduce the gentlemen who are with me, I thought I'd read out a letter that we've had from a correspondent, and it reads thus: "What has happened to the PN pod? I've been really enjoying it, but there seems to have been a delay since the last one. I've particularly enjoyed listening to contributing editor Kingsley Singleton's stories." And that's from, our correspondent is from, it's called Mr. K. Singleton in Lincolnshire. So we do apologise, Mr. Singleton, that there has been a delay between the pods. There's been various reasons for that. But allow me now to introduce, ironically, from Lincolnshire, contributing editor Kingsley Singleton. Hi, Kingsley.
Hello, I'm so glad to be back.
Have you been sending letters into your own podcast?
I should have put my mum's name on that. I should have put my mum's name on that, shouldn't I? But I couldn't afford the postage from Devon. That was the thing.
Well, welcome, Kingsley. Nice to have you. Nice to have you along. And a man who we always say needs no introduction and then introduce him anyway. It's the editor of Photography News, Will Chung. Hi, Will. Long time no see.
Hi, Rog. Hi, Kingsley. Hope you're both well.
We are. Well, I'm well. Kingsley's turned into this person who just randomly emails his own podcast.
It's been a long, lonely few months.
Yes, we do apologise for the delay. We're back now, and we'd like to make sure that we'll be doing this as regularly as possible. Those of you who haven't listened to us before, this is sort of half hour, 45 minutes of us just chatting about various things, what we've been shooting. We're going to cover off some information about printing your images today as well, and then answer a few reader questions. Obviously, if you've listened to us before, you'll know that already. So without further ado, Kingsley, it's all about you today. What have you been shooting since we last spoke?
Well, yeah, I've been shooting some flash tutorials, sort of technique things. And so I've been kind of hoodwinking my neighbours into posing for these things. So I've kind of got like quite a nice variety of subjects going on and quite a lot of raised eyebrows. And also I managed to get away for a few days and went up to the Lincolnshire coast to do some landscape pictures. Actually, the main reason I went up there was to get some dark skies because I bought an astro tracker to do some sort of like nice starry kind of landscapes. But of course, as anyone will tell you, anyone who ever buys anything to do with astronomy, as soon as you buy it, you have to look forward to 2 weeks of solid cloud cover. And that's exactly what happened when I got up round sort of Spilsby kind of way. But I still got out to the coast and I did some sort of what I would describe in a slightly humorous way as sort of fine art landscapes, because it's a very flat place, the Lincolnshire coast, as anyone who's been there will testify. So there's not a massive amount you can do apart from sort of look for kind of weird little furrows in the landscape and kind of just enjoy the flatness.
I was going to ask about that because I noticed your pictures that you put up on Instagram, I believe. I thought they were quite interesting. I'll be honest. I thought they were actually quite good. I've got to admit it. I thought they were rather good because they're the sort of
some mistake.
Damned by faint praise.
They're the sort of landscape that most people would just not even think about committing to film or digital because they look a bit bleak and a bit. Yeah, there's no features there, as you've already said. So what's the process there? Were you channeling your inner Charlie Waite from our previous podcast and trying to get at one with the landscape?
It was an exercise in seeing what was possible, really. And sometimes images can just be nice just because they're simple. And, going back to the Lincolnshire landscape, what it does very well is simple. And so when you're out near the coast, you get these kind of cuts through the marshland, and you might get a bit of rotting machinery or sort of a fence post if you're lucky. You found like crowds of photographers hanging around the odd fence post that's there because it's the only piece of foreground interest in about 25 miles. But I mean, process-wise, I think for images like that, some level of consistency is important. So I just kind of framed everything up using pretty much the same kind of aspect ratio. I went for an arty kind of 5:4, which immediately gives everyone the gallery shivers. And just kind of stuck the horizon in the same place all the time. So when you looked through them as a series, they would sort of not be all over the place. And that sort of goes into thinking about how you present things, doesn't it? You want some level of consistency in framing and colour and stuff.
Excellent. I'm sure Will look forward to rejecting them at an RPS panel in the not too distant future.
Will, Will, they're on a thing called Instagram. So if you dial up your modem.
Excellent. Well, I've unusually, and not as regular listeners will know that Kingsley is normally the person who's photographing dogs, but actually these last few days it's actually been my turn to photograph some dogs, and I got completely by chance I got contacted to do some images for products that are appearing on Amazon, basically it's dog food. And it needed to be photographed with a dog. So I had a box of dog food and I had a dog handy. So I set about taking some pictures for an Amazon webpage. Now, this turned out to be quite a challenge because Amazon, as you can imagine, have a quite specific requirement in terms of what they need. That's Will's chair again, or his hip. So they have quite a specific requirement when it comes to photography. And obviously the dog food had to be out. The dog had to be lying down and behaving. I had a black dog against a white background. It was a real challenge, not only to stop him drooling or eating said food or not laying down. And so a few quite simple shots took quite a long time.
How many dinners did he have?
I'd probably say about 7 or 8.
Nice.
Yeah. Which obviously, there are some repercussions if you overfeed a dog. So quite a challenge. I mean, fun, but quite challenging.
That's actually quite a good point about dog photography in that, insofar as the drooling. So if you are using treats or you have some food stuff that's kind of in the pictures, you have to keep wiping it away. So you kind of if you're doing something like that, it's a good idea to have like a flannel or something to hand, just to kind of, because otherwise editing out drool in Photoshop is not the easiest thing.
No, indeed. And as it transpired, despite the fact that the original request was to have the dog in a domestic setting, once the pictures were submitted for approval, they actually came back and said, could you just do it all on white? So I've actually got to do them all over again. So anyway, there we go. So that was me. So looking forward to a drooling dog with flannel to wipe him up in the next few days as well. Well, what about you, Will? You've been out and about, or have you been doing something else?
Bit of everything, really. I've done some local landscape where I live. I live about 10 minutes walk from some farmers' fields. So I've been photographing barley and clouds and sunsets a lot locally. I've always been seeing my partner, who's based in London, and she's an expert insect photographer. So Annie took me to the local beauty spot, a place called Ockham Common, which was actually featured on Countryfile the other day, and taught me the ways of photographing insects. So I've been trying to photograph hoverflies and some bees. And I mean, Rod, you say about challenge. I was trying to photograph these things called green-eyed garden bees.
Right.
And the green-eyed garden bee does not stay still for very long at all. And I'm wandering around this prickly hedge with a macro lens, trying to get these little critters even in the lens, because they just literally, they land and they take off again almost immediately. And the males are far worse than the females, apparently. I found lots of mating flies. I photographed them because at least when they're mating, they're kind of more or less stationary. But I mean, I have to say, it was great fun and hard work, physically demanding, because you have to kind of get low. You have to hold a flash gun as well to get some filling flash. Holding a macro lens with the 105mm macro lens on a Nikon is quite a beefy unit.
Yeah. Trying
to hold that and a flash gun at the same time and focus on this moving subject. Ooh, that's hard work. I was 4 hours later, I was absolutely wiped out.
So give me an idea of camera settings that you're using for that.
Well, I said I was using a flash gun. I had high-speed sync flash set.
Right.
So obviously the sun was going in and out. So if the sun came out, my shutter speed went quite high.
Yeah.
So I was maybe at 400th of a second sometimes and 250th when it wasn't out. My aperture was f11 because, I mean, depth of field is a challenge in landscape and in all forms of photography. But when you do things really small, f11 still only gives you depth of field of literally millimeters, which means if your focus is out, not on the eye or on the antenna by mistake or on the wrong part of the insect's body, you don't get the right part sharp. So you have to kind of have to get into the right position. You want to be as parallel as possible to the insect if you want, for instance, a damselfly with the wings sharp as well as its head. So I was shooting around, let's say 250 f11, ISO 200 or 400, and I have to say my hit rate was poor, to put it mildly.
What was Annie's hit rate like? Was it better?
Well, she's much more used to it, and she was very good with these honeybees, which don't stay very still for long. And obviously, you blast away, and the hit rate is still low, but she got far more hits than I did.
So you've been trying this for a little while now. I think this is a recurring theme on podcasts when we ask you what you've been doing. You've been trying to photograph bugs. What are you discovering? Do you think the skill is camera skill, or is it knowledge of subject, or a combination? What's the most important?
I think, as with all forms of nature photography, I think having fieldcraft and nature skills basically is really, really important. But then obviously having camera skills too is another. Right. It's a different sport of camera skills. It's not so much visionary. It's much more technical to start with. It's a challenge. And, we've got these fantastic AF systems, single spot this and all that and the other, and all these eye detect and subject detect modes. But insects are still darn difficult. They're small. And you can't get too close to them because you just don't get enough depth of field. So You're shooting at a decent distance. Also, purely because I'm a coward, I don't want to get stung by anything anyway.
It sounds like you're more likely to get slapped by Annie than you are stung by a bee.
Enough of Annie. But anyway, as well as photography in the fields, something else I've been doing is looking through my old pictures because, frustratingly, we can't travel easily at the moment. And, the way the country is changing and we're changing the rules each time something happens. I've been going through a lot of old files and printing a lot. So I've been to Iceland a few times and I've been to Venice a few times. So I've been going through printing pictures from there. And I recognise this doesn't work particularly well on a podcast, but I've been doing things like this.
Note to the listeners: Will is now holding up an enormous black and white print of what looks like what is that? That's a block of ice by the looks of it?
That's an iceberg on the famous ice beach in Iceland.
More of a berglet, isn't it?
It's very much a berglet. I mean, this print is probably twice the size of the actual thing in reality. But this is a 17-inch print. It's about 30 inches across. And this is the thing about it. I love being able to do things like this. Just making a print. To me, it signals the end of the process. I know it's been said before, and it sounds awfully corny, and I know printing doesn't appeal to everybody. But I saw this picture on this beach when I took it, which is 3-4 years ago, and now I finally realised it, and it makes me so happy. And I am going to find somewhere to stick it up, maybe even get it framed at vast expense. The feel of it as well, even the smell of it, But it's on an Epson fine art paper. It's a fine art cotton paper, and it's just this experience.
Marvellous.
I'm preempting printing because I know we're going to talk about it a bit more later as well.
Yes, we are. And actually, as a sort of a precursor to that, Will, one of the other things that you've been doing this in these last few days is obviously you spoke to a chap at Epson and recorded a short interview with an account manager there called Dominic Gurney, who he was talking to you about a new product. Is that right?
Yeah, Epson earlier this year launched 2 printers, the SCP-700 and the SCP-900, and these are replacement printers. Now, for instance, my print there, the one I just waved around, which the listeners won't be able to see, was from an SCP-800, which is an A2 Epson printer launched around 5 years ago. So basically, they've refreshed their range with 2 new printers. The key improvements he will discuss. But yeah, I gave him a call and I thought, well, Dom, why do I need to consider a new printer? So we walked through that.
Well, let's take a listen.
For this Photography News podcast, I'm joined by Dom Gurney, account manager of Epson UK. Welcome, Dom. It's great to catch up with you. I mean, we're well into a pandemic lockdown, but how are things with you and how's business?
Well, thanks for having me, first of all, here on your podcast. It's great to speak to you and see you again. As you say, lockdown. It's been an interesting time, hasn't it, for everybody? I mean, on a professional level, it's been interesting. There's been areas of the business that have been quite tough. The graphics market's certainly been quite tough. But other areas, our consumer colleagues who sell the A4 consumer printers and scanners and things like that, they've had a very busy time of it because, we're fortunate at Epson in that we have we provide a wide range of products for our customers. So, we're not beholden to one market or one particular type of product. So, we've got everything from A4 printers through to large wide format, and everything from desktop through to commercial signage and textile printers. So some of those areas have been doing very, very well, and some of the areas have unfortunately not been doing so well. Overall, we've been okay. As a company, we've not furloughed or laid anybody off during this whole time. So we've been working throughout, working with our suppliers, with our retailers, to make sure we can get that product to the customers as they wanted it. Couriers have had a busy time of it, delivering a lot of products to people at home, and some of those have been our printers and scanners. So, we've been fortunate in that sense that, like I say, we've been able to balance the business so that overall we'll come out of this so far okay.
So, let's talk about printing as we're locked down at the moment. I must admit, during my time in lockdown, I've made quite a lot of prints, but printing for me is important because I'm an old-fashioned photographer. I used to shoot black and white negative film, and I used to have to print them because you couldn't look at the negatives and go, there's a finished image. So I'm used to printing. Now, a lot of our photographers, of course, a lot of our readers have probably come straight into digital. They haven't had the film background. And maybe they're now starting to think about printing. What advice would you have for people maybe just thinking about printing right now?
I think you're right. There's a wide range of people and their past experience and where they're coming into it, and also from where they're coming from in terms of the technology. They're capturing their images on. Some can be the traditional cameras, some can be phones. And I've always held the belief that it doesn't matter how you capture your image. You should always look to output it. Because ultimately, a picture isn't complete until you've printed it. It's a bit of a cliche saying, I know, it's come from me. But, it's true. A lot of people like yourself, you told me in the past, that, when you hold your print in your hand, there's nothing quite like that feeling of having it. When you look at it on screen, you don't have the same ownership of it. It's just a picture on a screen, and you just kind of flick past it, very quickly. Whereas having a print in your hand or on the wall displayed, it is different. You take more time to look at it. You look at it differently. And again, I hear quite often from people that, they spend hours editing their images, only to then print it, and they notice the tiny detail in the image that they've printed straight away, that they've been staring at the image for hours on screen, never spotted it. So there is something to be said about printing your images to really make sure you get that final quality output, to finally do it. Particularly, obviously, if you are going to be entering competitions or selling your images, that's obviously a whole different league. But if you're looking at just starting out, as you say, we've got a great wide range of products. You can look at A4 printers. Obviously, as with anything, there's a scale. So, you can start with an A4 4-color printer, which will do a good job. You get a nice color reproduction of an image, and it's what I would call good enough for my mom. I'll take pictures of my kids, print them on an office 4-color printer, and she's pleased with it because she's invested in the emotion of the image as opposed to the quality of the output. So at that level, absolutely fine. And we've got some great products, like I say, at that lower end. You can then step up to 6-color, where we add in a light magenta and a light cyan. So again, gives added shadow detail, added colors to give wider color gamut overall. And you can get those in A4 and A3 again. We've got the EcoTank products now, which I know you guys at Photography News have reviewed and praised before, thankfully. Yeah. Great products because not only do they give you that quality, it's lower cost because the EcoTank, big tanks of ink that we supply with it. Then you can step up to A3 and again go back to a cartridge-based model where we start to introduce an extra black or a grey. So if you are wanting to print black and white, you can start to get the better quality and shadow detail there. And then you can go right up to the P700, the new P700 and P900 short color products, which are the pinnacle. They're the absolute highest quality in the range. They're the flagship products in A3 and A2, and you just don't get better quality than those products in that size. So it's a journey like anything. Like when you buy a camera, you may initially buy a particular camera with a kit lens, and over time you'll invest in some specific nice prime lenses and what have you, depending on what you want to do. So again, with printers, size and space and budget always come into these factors. And it's great, obviously, if people can jump straight into the highest quality, because at least then they know they've got the best, and it's not the printer that's letting them down. But ultimately, we don't all have that. So yeah, you can start off with an A4 printer, and all of these printers, doesn't matter whether it's the low-end A4 one or P900, A2, it can still print your shopping list. It can still print your letters. It can still print homework. So, if space is a premium, you don't have to have lots of printers. I do hear sometimes that people have got dedicated printers for letters and dedicated photo printers, which is great, obviously. But, again, not everybody's got that luxury. So they can do a bit of everything, but obviously some are more fine-tuned to one thing than another. And it's just finding that balance, and that's why we like to talk to people at events and shows and things like that to find out what is the best product for them at that time.
No, I'm sure the listeners will appreciate your advice. And you mentioned those two new printers, and you announced them back in May. And the SCP-700 is in the shops now, as I understand, and the 900 is due later on this summer. But tell us a bit about them. I mean, you made a bit of a song and dance about them. I mean, it's nearly 5 years since your previous generation printers were launched. So, this has been a long time coming. But, I hear lots and lots of good things about it. I can't wait to try the SCP-700, which I know you'll be sending me soon. But tell us a bit about them. What are the highlights of these printers?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, there's lots of exciting features on these new products. Again, as you say, it's been a long time coming. We don't rush into it. At this level, we don't produce products just for the sake of it. We don't rebadge it. We don't just put a new name on it, change colours and send it out the door. We want to make sure that our customers are getting good value for money and they're seeing genuine incremental benefits from the products. So, that's it. So, yes, it's been 5 years since we launched P600, P800, and, there are significant changes. We have, again, using another cliche, gone back to the drawing board and started again with these printers. Some of the highlights, we've got a new violet ink in the printers. So that'll expand the colour gamut. So you'll be able to reproduce more shades of your blues and your purples and your violets. But it also adds into the shadow detail. So again, you'll get across the wide range of your prints, you'll just get more detail coming out because of that violet cartridge in there now. And that's come down from our professional products we've had in there for a while. Slightly different ink configuration, but we've added it here because we can see that will add a genuine benefit and increase the color gamut. Some of the other things we've added now, we've changed the paper loading so that it's much more consistent. You can load the heavyweight fine art through the rear feed, so that's a big improvement in there. Back to the inks, the matte and the photo black. Now you don't need to switch. Again, anybody that's used our printers in the past may have felt frustrated by having to switch those blacks and maybe lose a small amount of ink during that process. Now we're again taking technology from our professional printers above and in a higher range. We've developed it now so it's a true 10-channel, 10-color printer. Hence the name Ultrachrome Pro 10 ink set. So that's where that comes from. So yeah, we've enhanced the inks within the inks as well, and using the software technology within the driver. We've got new carbon black and black enhanced overcoat modes. So this basically refers to the quality settings that you can reproduce the prints at. The black enhanced overcoat, what that does is lays down an additional layer of the light grey ink and smooths out the surface of the print and therefore reflects more light. So you get a much more detailed print, better light reflection, a wetter look, and again, more shadow detail.
But those benefits on the black, do they come into the fine art surfaces as well? Or is it just the luster on the glossy papers where the benefit of the deeper blacks is more obvious?
No, it is just on the coated papers. Yeah, okay. So you will get the benefit on those. So if you do like your high gloss prints, this will definitely be a big benefit. You'll see an enhancement on there. So again, deeper, richer blacks, smoother light reflection, much better. For people using fine art or matte finishes, then no, it's switched off. It doesn't. You don't use it on there. So obviously we've got other technologies within the printer that enhance the matte paper finishes.
I see also now on the SCP-700. I mean, I know the previous generation had add-on gadgets to allow roll paper to be used, but now there's a spindle-less arrangement for for the SCP-700 to make very long prints, but only 13 inches still. That sounds amazing. What was the thinking behind that? And not having the gadget, but having a spindleless arrangement?
So again, we have the roll feed, as you say, there for people to produce panoramic prints if they wish to do so, or they can still produce standard size prints, just chop up the paper to the size off a roll. But the reason for removing the spindles or the roll adapters, roll holders, is a couple of things. It was a bit clumsy to be clipping them onto the back of the printer. The new method basically folds away into the back of the printer when you're not using it. It gives a smoother paper feed. But again, we found that some people, unfortunately, wouldn't realise the roll adapters were in the box, and they'd either throw them out with the packaging or put them up in the loft with the packaging. So, it's just something else that, it's there. People don't necessarily spot it straight away. So, by building it all into the printer, makes it more compact, easier, and again, inevitably, people can't forget where they are.
Something else that came up really strong in the press release was the fact you emphasise the smallness of these printers as well. I haven't seen one in the flesh yet, but have you managed that? Because you've said, I think in the press release, it says something like the SCP-700 has a footprint of an A4 printer, and yet, of course, it can produce A3 plus prints. That's a remarkable miniaturization of the printer. How have Epson managed that?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, another example is the P900, the A2 printer, now has the same footprint as what the P600 had previously, so the A3 printer. And as you say, it's the Japanese, they've got a good history of miniaturizing technology. This is what they're known for, isn't it? I don't know all the secrets personally. Whether they've got a shrink ray over in Japan or something, but it's basically they've re-looked at, like I say, they've gone back to the drawing board, looked at everything, how they can make it compact, how they can improve it, because desk space is a premium. And say, we're all working from home a lot more these days, so any extra space you can gain is definitely a bonus. So
well done. We're coming to the end, but I'm just going to put you on the spot. What's your favourite feature from these new printers? What's a single highlight for you of these two new printers?
Well, toughest question of the day. There's lots of things, as you say. There's going to be the quality, there's the new stylish design, the LCD screen, touch screen. But the one for me that stands out, because I'm a bit of a geek, bit of a nerd, I do like the new LED light that comes on as you print. So when you're printing, you can look through the lid of the printer, and the light comes on, and it shows you your print as it's being printed. For me, that's just a little nod, and I really like that. It's just it just helps you as well to check the layout, check the size. Number of times, even I've sent a job to print on an A3 sheet of paper, and it's come out A5 or A4 in the corner. We all do it. So, the sooner you can spot those mistakes, the sooner you can stop it, save the ink, save the paper, save your time. So for me, that's just a really nice, cute little thing.
That sounds a great idea. Dom, look, thanks for so much for your time. I know you're a busy man, and you've given us a few minutes of your time today, so that's brilliant. And thanks for your insight into the new products. I'm sure that our listeners will join me in wishing you and your company all the best, especially for the new printers. But take care, and we'll see you sometime soon, I hope. All the best.
Thanks very much for having me, and I look forward to seeing you in the flesh and everybody else again, and being able to show these printers to people. I've had them in my room here for best part of 6 months now, and I want to share them with more than my family, because they're getting a bit bored of them now. I want to get them out to people and show them so you can understand and see what I'm talking about. They are great products, and like I say, I want to see some new faces in the flesh.
Thanks, Dom.
Good stuff. So I just wanted to come back and pick up on something that you said before we listened to the Dom interview. There was about this idea about the completion of a process, and how printing for you is very much a kind of a final stage, and it's all part of the consideration, even when you're taking pictures in the first instance. So can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit? Because a lot of people, myself included, will just largely take pictures and then leave them languishing on a hard drive, or in Kingsley's case, uploading them to Instagram.
Yeah, sure. Well, the thing is, I shoot thousands of pictures like everybody else, and to be fair, most of them do languish on a hard drive, or I even update my website occasionally. But for me, it's because I've been brought up with the old in the old-fashioned way that I used to shoot film, and I like to, when I go into the landscape, I like to pre-visualize what I'm doing and pre-visualize how I see my final picture. Is it going to be on the wall, for instance? So it's very much in the school of Ansel Adams when he pre-visualized his work before he pushed the button. And that's one reason why I'm shooting medium format now. I'm trying to slow myself down and do this pre-visualization. So to me, you capture it, you use filters, get it right in camera. Obviously, you then process it as best you can. And then for me, the final step is making the print.
And are the Shea Chung walls littered with prints, or are you quite particular about what you display when you printed it out?
Well, I have a system. I mean, at the moment it's not up because I've been repainting, but I have a system of wires which hold up net curtains, and I have these posh pegs, and I make prints and I hang them up on these posh pegs, and I enjoy them. I enjoy them for a period of time, then they come down, then new prints go up.
I really like that as a way of displaying work, actually, because there's a sort of, when you're kind of thinking about what you might print, there's a kind of a weight of finality about it that sometimes makes you think, well, what am I actually going to do this? But if you think about it in quite a brief or transitionary kind of way, that you're going to put these things up for a bit and enjoy them, then take them down, it sort of unblocks the process a bit, maybe.
I think it does, and it gives you that enthusiasm to go shoot more as well. Because you look at your stuff and you think, oh, maybe I didn't get that quite right. And next time I go to that location, I'll reframe this way. I'll wait for a better sky. And actually gives you an inspiration as well, because you don't always get it right. And actually to hang up your work, which you then criticize yourself, is a good way of making yourself a better photographer, I think.
It sounds like there's a bit of an old, you mentioned it already, Will, but there's a bit of an old sort of darkroom aesthetic there as well, in terms of, because I remember when I used to print in the darkrooms, I always used to, you hang them up to dry, don't you, on a line with pegs and stuff like that. So it's kind of an echo back to that as well.
It is very much so. And actually, while we're talking about printing and papers, I thought maybe I should give a plug to our friends at Permajet, who have just launched this thing called The Knowledge on their website, which you can download. And I was just thinking for people who are maybe who are printing and maybe need a bit more help, or maybe are enthused to print but haven't gotten around to it. But this is The Knowledge. It's volume 1, but it's the art of paper selection. Obviously, it's based on Permajet materials, but there's some great photographers in there who are just basically talking about why they choose particular paper to print. So what we do is we can put a link on the PM website to the PDF, or go to Permajet's website, however you want to do it. But it's a free download. It's about 40 pages long. It covers all their papers. And you mentioned, Rog, the darkroom papers. I mean, I love their FB Barata papers, which are all redolent of the old fibre-based papers I used to use. And that's the papers I prefer to print on.
I'm actually wondering whether this constant printing and displaying of work in Will's house is just a reason to own uncorked bottles of red wine and pretend that he's at a gallery opening. Oh, Mr. Chung, I'm so glad you came.
Yeah. He employs somebody to walk around with canapes. Fantastic. Well, I know it's great to hear somebody who still advocates printing so much, Will. I mean, I know I wouldn't say it's a dying art. I mean, there's obviously it's definitely something that we'd encourage more and more photographers to do, just because of that sort of process completion. Kingsley, I know it's not something that you do regularly, but I presume you agree with Will's sentiments on this.
I definitely do, in particularly as part of the process, and the fact that I think there's some of the same things can be kind of had from putting stuff online and presenting things, and also getting feedback. That's one of the best things about printing stuff or displaying it online or wherever you want to kind of actually show off pictures, is that you do get to communicate with people about them. And even though kind of generally people online are either kind of polarized into being really nice and complimentary or utterly scathing, sometimes you can find a little bit of middle ground where you can actually discuss why you did something and how you did it, and sort of share some advice with other people.
I'm just looking forward. I've just made a little note while you've been chatting about piling in on Kingsley's next Instagram post. A constructive feedback, obviously.
You're very welcome.
Yeah.
Well, these horizons are too flat.
Yeah, there's nothing in the foreground. So, Will, I'm assuming that there's going to be some content in an upcoming issue about the Epson printer you've been using.
Yes, in issue 80, which is out now, which features me talking to Dom about the new printer, and he tells us what's great about it. In the next issue, we're going to get an SCP-700, which is the A3 Plus version printer, and we're going to give that a good test.
Fantastic. And what else is in the issue that's out now, Will?
The issue that's out now, we've got a big test on the Fujifilm X-T200, which is an entry-level X-series camera. And filters play a big part in this issue as well, because we've got two systems tested, actually. The H&Y 100mm system, which is all based on magnetism, which is really clever and neat. And the polarizer goes behind other filters. And I've also got my hands on the new Lee 85 system. And that's a system aimed at APS-C format and Micro Four Thirds format cameras. And that's an upgrade of their 7.5 system. So I've had that to play with, and that's rather nice too.
Fantastic. So it sounds like lots of kit, lots of printing advice, which is great. Obviously, the issue, as Will says, is out now. We are sending it out, and it is available in multiple places. Plus, it also you can also obviously read the magazine online at any time for free, plus all the back issues. So we're currently on the 80th issue. So if you find yourself with lots of time to kill, there's another 79 ahead of that to get through. The website is photographynews.co.uk. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter, and the handles for those are @photonewspn. And obviously we love to hear from you. So please do, if you do have a question for us on the podcast, then the email address is podcast@photographynews.co.uk. So we look forward to hearing from you. Some people who have done just that and got in touch with us on podcast@photographynews.co.uk have sent us a couple of questions, and they're kit-related questions related to recent launches. So we thought we might just cover these off. Kingsley, I'm going to come to you on the first one. It's from a gentleman called Ashley, who's in Peterborough, not far from you. Yeah. Says, do you have any thoughts about the new Z5, the Nikon Z5, and how does it compare to other Z models? Kingsley, you're a Nikon person. What do you reckon?
Yeah, and also I've been looking at that system for a while and wondering at what point I'll sort of jump into it. And I think it's a really interesting launch because it kind of rounds out what's there quite nicely at the moment. And while people are waiting for probably a kind of a higher spec pro level camera to come along as well, this entry level body is actually going to kind of open things up quite nicely for people who want to switch from DSLRs.
So educate me here, because I must admit this one I've obviously been aware of the camera coming out, but what are the headline kind of specs on it, and how do they compare? So it's not full frame, right?
No, it is full frame.
Oh, right. Okay.
So there are 3 full frame Z cameras now: the Z5, 6, and the Z7. And this one is as I say, the entry level version. So it's got a similar res to the Z6. The only difference there is that it doesn't have the backside illuminated sensor that the Z6 has got. But I think if the other cameras in the series are anything to go by, it's going to be really good. Some of the other features that that sort of mark it out as an entry level camera are, it's got a lower frame rate, but it's still kind of 4.5 frames a second. So like that's, when you think that 5 or 6 years ago, that's what a lot of the cameras we were using had, and now we look at cameras that have got 10, 20, 30 frames a second. I mean, arguably, are you going to use much more than 4.5, 5, 6 frames a second? I'm not sure how useful those extra frames are, but I mean, so I don't think that kind of counts against it. Video wise, it's got 4K, but it has a crop to the sensor when you're shooting 4K. So that's one of the reasons why, if you did want to shoot video, perhaps you look at the Z6 as well. I know actually that Will's had his hands on the camera, and I've only looked at it online. So, Will, what were your first thoughts about it?
Well, I have spent a few days with it, and in fact, the Z5 will be reviewed in the next issue of Photography News. I've enjoyed using it, to be fair. I mean, the quality, I didn't have a Z6 to do a direct comparison, but I thought the quality was very good. As Kingsley said, it is full frame. It is 4K, but it does have a 1.7 times crop, so that's quite significant. But it's got 2 card slots, which is something I know a lot of people criticise about the other Nikons. They're different card slots. These are conventional SD slots, not QXD or CF Express. But having 2 slots is good. The body form is more or less identical to the Z6. Much to like about it. The viewfinder's lovely. I really enjoyed using it, to be fair. And it's £1,700 with the 24 to 50 kit zoom.
Yeah, and that zoom makes it very compact. I mean, the camera itself is pretty much identical to the others, apart from the fact that I think it doesn't have the top plate LCD, and one of the mode dials was moved across instead of that. But I mean, in terms of handling, it's identical, and that should be really good news, because the Z6 and the Z7 both handled brilliantly. And the other thing that I was going to pick up on there that Will mentioned, the EVF is the same as the other cameras as well, and that's a massive deal because the EVFs in those cameras are brilliant.
So a lot to like. So we a general thumbs up, but actually look out for the issue 81, is it, Will, of Photography News, that will have the full review in?
That's right, out in September.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next question, which comes from Keith in Preston. And let's go to you with this, Will. And he says, quite simply, I'm intrigued by Canon's new fixed aperture telephoto lenses. Now, there's 2 of these, I believe. Would you recommend them?
Well, I'm intrigued too. I mean, I haven't had a hands-on the things yet, but he's talking about the 600mm f11 and the 800mm f11 for the Canon R system, their mirrorless full-frame system. The beauty of it is, by having a fixed aperture, and to be fair, the aperture being f11 is quite modest, of course, but by having a fixed aperture, they've actually made these lenses really compact for their focal length and very affordable. I mean, they're both under £1,000. Now, for an 800mm lens, f11 for under £1,000, I think that's very, very impressive. Obviously, because there's only one aperture, we've got to presume it's going to perform quite well. Otherwise, you're going to run into trouble. But I think for nature photographers and for action photographers, there's much to like about these lenses. I'm very keen to get my hands on them to see what they can do.
So physically, I mean, what's the design? Is it a mirror lens design?
No, not mirror lens. They're conventional lenses. I mean, it does fold in. It does, collapse on itself a little bit. So it's very portable and it's very light. I mean, I was demonstrated this online, so that's what I could see. But the lens kind of collapses and then folds out for use. But it's not a mirror lens, no.
Right, okay.
Because mirror lenses were really difficult to use as well, because they were very light and fiddly with a fixed aperture. So we could have the same experience here. But the thing is, both lenses will autofocus, and you both will also fit a teleconverter and will autofocus, apparently.
I think that's going to be one of the really interesting things when it comes to testing them, isn't it? The ability to, particularly if you're using these for sort of moving subjects, how fast they're going to lock on. I mean, initially f11 sounds like a very, very small aperture to be considering that you would get really good AF performance, but we've seen really good developments on those, the AF performance in those Canon R cameras anyway, haven't we? So
we have.
Absolutely. So in answer to Keith's question, we're equally intrigued. We haven't had a chance to test them properly, but in principle, they look like quite a cracking buy by the sounds of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, those 2 people got in touch with us on the email podcast@photographynews.co.uk. So please, if you do have any questions, feel free to send those over to us. So I think we've almost reached the end of this latest episode of the Photography News podcast. But of course, as regular listeners will know, we never finish a podcast without getting a Will's word of wisdom. So Will, what have you got for us this time round?
Well, my word of wisdom this time comes because I think about printing. So, but that said, this tip applies to all photographers, because whether you put your pictures online or make print, you need to get your monitor calibrated. So consider your workflow. So if you are going to make a print, you need to color manage your workflow from monitor through to printer. I mean, some people, go all the way from capture to, but I'm just advocating from get your monitor calibrated and use the right profiles when you print. But getting your calibrated monitor will also make a difference to those people who just upload online. It just means that when you upload your pictures, they look right on the website. So with kit from X-Rite and Data Color, it's not too expensive to get your monitor calibrated.
Just one very quick one on that as well, Will. One of the things that always used to confuse me when I did some printing at home out of Photoshop was there is a drop-down menu within Photoshop, the Photoshop print dialog menu, that says, do you want Photoshop to handle colors, or do you want the printer to handle the colors when it comes to printing out? Now, it seemed to depend on the file that I was printing as to which one produced the better result. But is there any rule here, or which one do you guys go for?
Well, people who print will use Photoshop or let the software manage the colours, because then you then select the profile. And when you buy papers from Permajet, for example, you can just go to their website and download a generic profile made on that printer for that particular paper, and you use that. So when you want Photoshop to manage the colour, the next option will be you pick the profile which is appropriate.
Right. Okay.
For more advanced printers, will obviously make their own profiles, but that's another step. But these generic profiles are free. All the manufacturers offer them on their website. They're easy to install. I mean, even somebody like me can make sure you install my profile, and that's what you use.
And presumably this is often a step that people will disregard or will miss out, whereas actually it sounds like it's pretty vital in the whole process as well.
Yeah, well, like I say, just getting your monitor profiled is the first big step for all photographers, regardless of whether you output print or not. And then if you do output print, yes, you need the right profiles for the paper. It sounds techy, but it's not difficult. That's the thing about printing. People are scared by it. I think that's probably due, certainly with the early days of printing, when printers used to jam up, they used to be expensive, inks used to run out often, prints used to fade. There are all sorts of issues. But now, the choice of media, prints will last many, many years. So Kingsley's Lincolnshire landscapes could last way beyond his years on Earth.
What a legacy.
What a happy thought that is.
What a legacy. So we need to get the nation printing, Will. That's what we need to do.
Absolutely right.
Right. So get out there, kids, and print your pictures. That's what it's all about. Well, I think that brings us to an end to this latest issue of the Photography News podcast. Hope you enjoyed listening to us. Hope you got some useful tips. Certainly I'll know to have a flannel for my dog shooting. So that just leaves me to say thanks very much to contributing editor Kingsley Singleton.
Thanks very much. I'm going to go and look for more flat and grim and depressing landscapes now, probably around Sheppey or Dungeness.
Fantastic. But stop emailing your own podcast. And thanks very much for your time, Will.
Take care.
And thanks everybody for listening. Cheers now. Bye-bye.